Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil Jaffer na ang pagpapalaki ng mga anak na nakasentro sa fitrah ay nagsisimula sa pag-unawa sa tatlong yugto ng pag-unlad na nabanggit sa isang kilalang hadith. Ang bata ay isang prinsipe sa loob ng 7 taon, isang alipin sa loob ng 7 taon, at isang tagapayo o vizier sa loob ng 7 taon bago tuluyang maging malaya at nagsasarili. Maaring magbago ang paraan ng pagsasabuhay ng mga yugtong ito ayon sa panahon at kultura, ngunit nananatiling pareho ang pangunahing prinsipyo. Sa unang yugto, ang bata ay itinuturing na isang prinsipe. Dapat pahintulutan ng mga magulang na malayang umunlad ang tabi'a ng bata, ang kanyang likas na mga pagnanasa, damdamin, emosyon at mga ugali, sa isang kapaligirang puno ng tiwala at seguridad. Hindi ito nangangahulugang layaw o pagpapasobra sa bata. Sa halip, layunin nitong mabuo ng natural ang kanyang panloob na lakas at pagkatao bago simulang hubugin ng fitrah ang kanyang kaluluwa. Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil na hindi kayang hubugin ng fitrah ang isang mahinang tabi'a. Katulad ng isang uod na kailangang lumakas muna bago maging isang magandang paru-paro, kailangan munang tumatag ang tabi'a bago makapag-iwan ng fitrah ng malalim at pangmatagalang bakas sa kaluluwa. Kapag masyadong maagang sinupil ng mga magulang ang bata sa pamamagitan ng takot, kahihiyan o labis na pagkontrol, maaaring lumaki siyang mahina ang damdamin at kulang sa espiritual na kapanatagan. Binigyang diin niya na hindi dapat palakihin ng mga magulang ang kanilang mga anak na natatakot sa opinyon ng ibang tao. Sa halip, dapat silang lumaking mas mahalaga sa kanila kung ano ang iniisip ng Allah kaysa sa iniisip ng lipunan. Ang pagpapalaki na nakabatay sa takot ay maaaring makasira sa likas na kadalisayan ng bata at magbunga ng kawalan ng kumpiyansa, labis na paghahangad ng pag-apurba ng tao at maging ng mga banayad na anyo ng shirk. Sa pamamagitan ng mga halimbawa mula sa buhay ng sugo ng Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kasama sina Imam Hasan at Imam Hussein alaihimussalam, ipinakita ni Brother Khalil na ang mga bata ay dapat tratuhin ng may pagtitiis, habag at emosyonal na seguridad. Ang tungkulin ng mga magulang ay gabayan sila ng may kabaitan, maging mapagmatsyag sa mga palatandaan ng problema at iwasang sirain ang kanilang tiwala sa sarili habang tinuturuan silang igalang ang iba. Sa kabuuan, ang unang yugto ng pagpapalaki ay nakatuon sa pangangalaga sa kadalisayan, kumpiyansa at emosyonal na pagiging bukas ng bata upang ang kanyang fitrah ay lumitaw ng natural, malakas at matatag sa tamang panahon.
What we want to discuss tonight is how to raise fitrah-oriented children, or the importance of raising children with fitrah. And we wish to base our discussion largely on a very popular hadith that says, الولد أمير 7 سنين وعبد 7 سنين ووزير 7 سنين ثم خلوا سبيله. A child is a prince for 7 years, then he is a slave for 7 years, then he is a vizier for 7 years, then set him free and let him go. This hadith can largely be applied for boys, as we shall see, but it can be applied for girls as well. And also within this understanding that as human generations change, the ages of maturity change. So this might vary from certain eras to others. It may not exactly be 7 years, 14 years, 21 years, but there is these 3 phases certainly that we need to talk about. I will talk about them in terms of first 7 years, next 7 years, third 7 years, but keep this in mind, it could be 3 phases. What the hadith is telling us in relation to our discussion on tabi'a and fitrah is that in the first phase of your child's life, in the first 7 years of your child's life, treat them like a prince, treat them like a king, meaning let them express their tabi'a freely. Let them enjoy and let them command and let them do as they please initially. You are their slave. Then وَعَبْدٌ 7 سنين. In the next phase, they become your servant. You become the master. Now you train them. Now you discipline them. Now you teach them with your fitrah how to rein in their tabi'ah. And then in the third phase, they become your vizier. During this third phase, you now let them show that they can rein their tabi'ah with their own fitrah. And you are still there besides them to guide them. So that as and when they forget and they sleep, you once again remind them. But you now treat them as a vizier. In other words, you consult them. You ask them for advice, not because you need their advice, but you want to see whether their thought process, their understanding, their outlook on life is now based on the fitrah. Thereafter, ثُمَّ خَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُ. Thereafter, you have done your task. Now you set them free. Now you let them become independent. You let them initiate their own family so that they can have their own children and start that cycle again. The obvious question that comes to mind first is this first phase, when they are princes and when they are kings, why leave them to express their tabi'a so freely? Why allow tabi'a to take strong roots? Why not force them to follow fitrah from the time they're born? Why even give tabi'a a chance to take a firm foothold? Now, we have already spoken about the formation of the ego, and we said that enlightenment is not the result of not having an ego, but it is the result of shattering the ego. And I gave you an example of how a child has difficulty adjusting in society if they grow up without any sense of possession or any sense of belonging. In the same way, what we wish to see tonight is that it is necessary for tabi'a to take a firm foothold, and a very firm foothold, before fitrah can do its work. And I will give you an example of this. We have talked about the caterpillar, and we talked briefly about how in its initial stages, for the first 2-3 weeks, it just eats like crazy until its own body mass multiplies thousands of times. It is by doing that kind of an indulgence in tabi'a that this caterpillar's shell is hard enough so that when it pushes with force to allow its wings to grow, that cocoon, that chrysalis, has the ability to withstand the force of that pushing. In the same manner, tabi'a has to be strong enough to withstand the pushing of fitrah so that the wings can emerge when it is right, rather than the wings collapsing or not emerging fully. Okay? To put it differently, tabi'a is the slate on which the pen of fitrah will write. The pen of fitrah has a very sharp nib. If tabi'a is weak or frail, if it is like a parchment or a paper, when the pen of fitrah writes, it will rip the paper of tabi'a. But if tabi'a becomes rock solid, and then you inscribe with the pen of fitrah on the rock of tabi'a, that will stay forever. And we will explain this again. Archaeologists have found drawings in caves where in the drawing even the eyelashes of the drawings of that creature or that person have been preserved for thousands of years. But papers or parchment, they have to use chemicals to preserve it. It quickly fades away, it quickly wears out. So tabi'a has to take a strong root before fitrah can write. At the same time, while we allow our young children in this first phase to express their tabi'a, we also have to ensure that we do not do anything that will prevent fitrah from emerging when the time is right. And the biggest thing that we need to be careful about is that this child should not grow up to become a fearful person, should not become a creature who is constantly afraid of others and what people will think and what people will see. This child has to grow to be self-confident. This child has to grow to be concerned about what Allah will say before thinking about what people will say. This is where we need to be careful when we are raising the child. So we don't really need to impose fitrah. We just need to make sure we don't interfere in the process, that natural process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in a child. As an example, we compared fitrah as a rider and tabi'a as a mount, as a wild horse that needs to be tamed and reined in by fitrah. Now, when a horse is very young, when it is called a foal, when it is less than 1 year old, it is still very weak. At that point, you cannot describe it as a wild horse. If you try and tame a foal, it will be a very weak creature. When it grows up and becomes a horse, it will not be able to gallop with speed. It will not have zeal. It will not have passion. It will not have force. There will be no point in reining it because there is nothing that needs to be reined. You have to allow it to become a horse. You have to allow its animal instinct and wildness to emerge. Thereafter, you tame it and you rein it in. It is in this same manner that you allow tabi'a to show itself with full confidence, without any fear. And then you bring in fitrah and you use fitrah to inscribe on the tablet of tabi'a.
Nagbabala si Brother Khalil na kapag ang mga bata ay pinalaki sa pamamagitan ng takot, pamimilit at matinding presyon, madalas silang nagiging relihiyoso lamang sa panlabas na anyo, ngunit nawawalan ng tunay na koneksyon sa Allah sa kanilang kalooban. Sa halip na magkaroon ng taus-pusong pananampalataya, natututo silang isagawa ang relihiyon upang bigyang kasiyahan lamang ang kanilang mga magulang o ang lipunan. Ang ganitong mga bata ay maaaring magdasal lamang kapag may nakatingin, magsuot ng hijab kapag may nagbabantay, o magpakita ng pagiging relihiyoso sa harap ng iba, ngunit lihim na talikuran ang mga gawaing ito kapag sila ay nag-iisa. Nagbubunga ito ng pagkukunwari, pagpapanggap, at panloob na salungatan sapagkat ang kanilang mga kilos ay inuudyukan ng takot sa tao sa halip na pagmamahal at kamalayan sa Allah. Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil na ang tunay na layunin ng tabi'a o paghubog ng pagkatao ay hindi kontrol, kundi paggabay. Hindi tungkulin ng mga magulang na ipilit ang fitrah sa kanilang mga anak sapagkat inilagay na ito ng Allah sa puso ng bawat tao. Ang kanilang tungkulin ay protektahan ang fitrah mula sa pagbaluktot na dulot ng takot, kahihiyan, kawalan ng kapanatagan, at labis na pagkapit sa opinyon ng iba. Binigyang diin niya na ang mga katagang gaya ng ano na lang ang sasabihin ng mga tao ay maaaring magturo sa bata na higit na pahalagahan ang pag-apruba ng tao kaysa sa pag-apruba ng Allah. Sa paglipas ng panahon, natututo silang gumawa ng mga pasya upang mapasaya ang iba sa halip na hanapin ang kaluguran ng Allah. Sa makatuwid, ang tunay na pagpapalaki ay tungkol sa paghubog ng mga anak na kusang pinipili ang kabutihan kahit walang nakakakita sa kanila. Ang batang pinalaki sa kapaligiran puno ng kumpiyansa, awa at emosyonal na seguridad ay higit na magkakaroon ng tunay at malalim na relasyon sa Allah. Kapag pinangangalagaan ng mga magulang ang kadalisayan ng puso ng kanilang anak at iniiwasan ang pagpapalaki na nakabatay sa takot, natural na magigising ang fitrah mula sa kanyang kalooban at aakay sa kanya tungo sa taus-pusong pananampalataya at espiritual na paghinog.
In the first 7 years of a child, there is purity. This purity should not be interfered with by the parent. That is why it is important, we said, for the parents to be fitrah oriented. We mentioned a hadith a couple of nights ago from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he said, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala fitratil Islam." Every child that is born on this earth is born based on fitrah. It is the parents who interfere in this vertical movement. They come in horizontally and distort that progression of that child. So it is important to keep that purity in the first 7 years. In the first 7 years, a child is very pure. It is after this first phase, in the second phase, that they learn rivalry, that they learn deceit, that they learn to be greedy, that they learn envy, that they learn jealousy, that they learn to lie, that they learn to hold a grudge, that they learn this idea that you are bad, I am good, I will not forgive you. Look at children in the first phase. They will fight, within minutes they make up, they start playing again. We say it ourselves as well, right? When little children are playing, don't interfere as parents, let them fight. They will make up, they will play, fight few minutes, they're playing again. If only we had been like that as adults. But we cannot, because we are egoically driven. We need that fight in our mind as drama that we can play again and again, because it is comforting for our ego to know that I was oppressed, wrong was done to me, and I need to be avenged. So we keep doing that again and again and again in our minds. The ego is not so solid, not so insecure in the first phase, and then it starts emerging more so in the second. So as we said, that at the young age, a child does not need interference. You don't have to force fitrah into a child who is less than 7 years old. You just have to ensure that you don't interfere in the process, that you look out for the warning signs, that you don't make them fearful, you keep them with self-confidence. It is like the gauge in your car. You just look out for the warning signs. When the gauge in your car starts saying service engine soon, you need to start thinking about doing something about it. If you keep leaving it and ignoring it, the problem gets bigger and bigger. There could come a time where you could lose the car altogether. Right? So when the first time your child says a lie, the first time your child tries to take something that is not his or hers or tries to steal, that does not mean you come down on them like a ton of bricks. That is simply a warning sign. That doesn't mean your whole engine is collapsed. No. Their tabi'a has not yet gotten used to being reined in by fitrah. But you watch for these signs, and then you use love and care to tend for that and to help them. But timing is very important, that the child should not have this anxiety and fear. Some of the ulama even give this example, that in the days of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam would run into the mosque. And sometimes when the Messenger of Allah, peace be on him, and his family was praying, they would come and sit on his back. Or sometimes when he was in the pulpit, they would come, and both Shia and Sunni scholars have reported this, that sometimes they would run up to him and Rasulullah would carry them on the mimbar on his chest, so that their legs would be dangling from his chest, and the people sitting right at the back of the mosque could see the ankles of Al-Hasan and Al-Husayn while the Prophet was on the mimbar. Now, we understand that these are ma'asum, and from our aqidah perspective, they are not doing this in the sense that any child would do. There is some ma'rifah. Some of the ulama have even said that it was not happening all the time. It may have happened only once, to show that salat is fiqh, but imamat is aqidah. Aqidah takes precedence over fiqh, as an example, right? But these ulama also say that even if Al-Hasan and Al-Husayn were not ma'asum, even if they did not have ma'rifah, Rasulullah would still not have stopped them. Why? Because if you stop the child at that age from expressing freely his self-confidence, you make him fearful. That is where you introduce shirk. That is where polytheism comes in, fearing others besides Allah. What will people think? What will people say from that young age? From the time they're young, we start making them fearful about what people think, what people say. Whereas we need to think about this a little bit. This is not to say that we let our children run wild, inconvenience others, make noise, bounce off the walls, and just disturb others, right? It is true that it takes a village to raise a child, but typically you need the consent of the villagers. So you cannot do this unilaterally and impose your child on others and say, my child is learning to solidify his tabi'a, so he's just going to do what he wants, right? If your child is causing inconvenience to people, for example, in the masjid or wherever, you can remove the child from that position not to inconvenience others. But do that rather than scaring the child, making him fearful, scolding him constantly, punishing him. Don't do this, don't do that all the time. This makes the child fearful, because the child is not mature enough to understand fitrah and tabi'a and what is the ihtaram of salat, what is the ihtaram of masjid. They can't understand this. The only thing they can understand is be afraid of people. People don't like it. What will people say? That's all they can comprehend. So it is important that we don't instill fear in them. If we can make sure that they do not become fearful, greedy, attached, and afraid of people, then we set a fitrah, a tabi'a base that is smooth, on which fitrah can write very clearly. To put it differently, a young child needs to learn the meaning of la ilaha. It needs to create a tablet, a tabi'a base of la ilaha, that there is no other God. And then when this child attains maturity and puberty and starts understanding fitrah, then the pen of fitrah will write on it illallah. We hinted at this a couple of nights back. We said Allah is always with you. He is always attached to you. You do not need to find Allah. When was Allah absent or lost or missing that you need to find Him? The problem is the attachments that are blocking us between us and Allah, that sit between us and Allah. You simply remove these veils. So when you raise a child without fear of other than Allah, then you have paved the way. You have taught him La ilaha. There is no other God. There is none other to be feared. There is none other to be adored. And then fitrah will write illallah. It is the same with addictions. You remove addictions and then what remains is the love and the addiction to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If this is not done, then the child will grow up to be a child of contradictions. The child will become pretentious. The child will become complicated in his thought process. The child will become hypocritical. He will do things only to please you, but behind the scenes he will do something else. He will pray salat when you are at home, but when you're not at home, he will not pray salat. She will wear hijab when she's leaving the house, but once she goes to school, she will remove her hijab because she is doing it under compulsion, under force. She is constantly or he is constantly making decisions based on what people think, what my parents think, never thinking what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala think.
Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil Jaffer na ang ikalawang 7 taong yugto ng pagkabata ay isang napakahalagang panahon sapagkat hindi pa sapat ang pagkamahinog ng bata upang ganap na maunawaan ang fitrah, ang banal na patnubay o ang mga inaasahan ng Allah sa kanya. Sa yugtong ito, inilalarawan ang bata bilang isang alipin sapagkat ang magulang ang pansamantalang gumaganap bilang fitrah ng anak. Kung ang magulang ay nakatuon sa fitrah, ang kanyang tungkulin ay gabayan ang tabi'a ng bata hanggang sa maging sapat na malakas ang sariling fitrah nito upang manguna. Sa pamamagitan ng paghahalin tulad sa isang mangangabayo at kabayo, ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil na ang tabi'a ng bata ang nagbibigay ng lakas at paggalaw. Samantalang ang fitrah ng magulang ang nagbibigay ng direksyon. Ang layunin ay hindi supilin ang mga pagnanasa o likas na hilig ng bata, kundi turuan siyang maunawaan na ang mga ito ay dapat laging pinamamahalaan ng fitrah. Unti-unting ipinapakilala ng mga magulang ang tamang mga prioridad sa buhay ng bata. Itinuturo nila na bagamat pinahihintulutan ang mga likas na gawain tulad ng paglalaro, ang pagsunod sa Allah ay dapat laging manguna. Halimbawa, maaaring ipagpatuloy ng bata ang kanyang paglalaro. Ngunit kapag dumating na ang oras ng sala o pagdarasal, ang pagsamba sa Allah ang dapat unahin. Ang layunin ng yugtong ito ay sanayin ang bata na maunawaan na ang fitrah ang dapat gumabay sa tabi'a at na ang banal na patnubay ay dapat laging magkaroon ng kapangyarihan kaysa sa pansariling pagnanasa at kagustuhan.
The second phase is necessary because hopefully the parent or the guardian who is raising this child is already fitrah oriented. So because the child does not have the maturity to understand fitrah and what is fitrah and how to make those decisions and what does Allah expect from me, therefore in this second phase, the child is an abd, is a servant, is a slave because you are the child's fitrah. Your fitrah will write upon the child's tabi'a. Until another 7 years have passed, at which point the child's own fitrah can take the reins. It is almost as if the child is on the horse but you are holding the reins. You are walking beside the child and your fitrah is inscribing on the child's tabi'a. So it is important that you teach the child in this second phase that even though they have this animal instinct, they should never rebel against their fitrah, because fitrah at that point is still green, it is still not developed. Fitrah grows in the shell of tabi'a. It needs tabi'a in order to grow. So in that analogy of the rider and the mount, tabi'a is still determining movement, but fitrah is attempting to define the direction of that movement. As an example, in that second phase, in the first phase your child just plays all day. In the second phase, when your child is playing, you don't stop them from playing, even if that play is a waste of time. They might be playing computer games. Computer games is a waste of life, isn't it? All you're doing is shooting pixels. It might give you some pleasure, but it is not for anyone who is concerned with spiritual evolution. But you don't stop your child from playing. You let them play. What you do is when it is time for salat, they must stop playing. So you introduce fitrah into that lifestyle of tabi'ah so that they know their priorities. That when you have to choose, fitrah must always come first.
Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil na sa ikalawang yugto ng pagpapalaki, kailangang patuloy na ituro ng mga magulang sa kanilang mga anak na ang tunay na kaligayahan ay nagmumula sa pagsunod sa fitrah. Sa halip na itanggi o sugpuin ang mga likas na pagnanasa, dapat itong gabayan at disiplinahin ng may karunungan. Ginamit niya ang halimbawa ng alkansya ng isang bata upang ipakita kung paano maaaring gamitin ng mga magulang ang likas na pagnanais ng bata na mag-ipon ng kayamanan upang maituro ang pagiging mapagbigay at kawang-gawa. Sa ganitong paraan, ang tabi'a ay hindi winawasak kundi nililinis at pinipino sa pamamagitan ng fitrah. Binigyang diin niya na ang prosesong ito ay nangangailangan ng mga magulang na sila mismo ay sumusunod sa patnubay ng Allah. Dahil hindi pa ganap na nahuhubog ang sariling fitra ng bata, ang pagsunod niya sa isang magulang na nakatuon sa fitra ay nagiging daan upang matutuhan niyang sumunod sa Allah. Sa pamamagitan ng papuri, paghihikayat at naaangkop na mga bunga ng kanyang mga kilos, unti-unting natututuhan ng bata na iugnay ang kabutihan sa kaligayahan at ang kamalian sa kawalan ng kasiyahan. Ang layunin ng disiplina ay hindi parusa o pagkontrol, kundi edukasyon at paghubog ng espiritual na pagkatao. Sa paglipas ng panahon, ang mga karanasang ito ay malalim na naitatatak sa isipan at pagkatao ng bata, na lumilikha ng matibay na paniniwalang ang pagsunod sa fitra ay nagdudulot ng kapayapaan, kaganapan at tunay na kaligayahan. Magkatuwang ang mga taong ito ng paggabay at paghubog ay naghahanda sa bata para sa susunod na yugto ng kanyang buhay. Ang panahon kung kailan ang kanyang sariling fitra ay magiging sapat na matatag at ganap na hinog upang gabayan ang kanyang mga pasya ng may kamalayan, kalayaan at pananagutan.
Your young child has a saving box, a piggy bank, right? Putting coins in is very pleasurable to insan, because it is the same pleasure as you get when you deposit a check in the bank or when you see your paycheck. But taking the coins out of that saving box is very painful. Unless you make provisions from before and you teach the child that every time you have $1, you will put 10 cents in charity and 90 cents here. Now you are draining tabi'a with fitrah. So you do not deny the child what tabi'a wants. You simply use your fitrah to guide that child. وَعَبْدٌ سَبْعَ سِنِينَ, that second phase when your child is a servant. That servitude is good, provided the person upbringing the child, the parent or the guardian, is fitrah oriented. That means that parent also obeys Allah and is concerned about what is Allah's opinion in this matter. And as we said, at this point, the child's tabi'a is being reined in by the parent's fitrah and not by their own fitrah. And if the parent is fitrah oriented, then obedience to someone who is fitrah oriented is the same as obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. During the 7 years of servitude now, the second phase, وَعَبْدٌ سَبْعَ سِنِينَ, if we have given them consistent values and consistent messages of fitrah, then tabi'a will learn that its happiness only comes from obeying fitrah. And every time it disobeys its fitrah, that child will be unhappy. That child will feel a sense of guilt. And that is where this issue of rewarding your child, praising them when they do something good, and showing concern when they do something wrong, or even having consequences for it. And by consequences, I don't mean physical abuse. I mean whatever system or whatever methods may be popular in our culture, whether it is a timeout, whether it is a reduction in the allowances or pocket money, whatever it is. But you train your child during those 7 years of ubudiyah, that whenever you follow fitrah, life is good, you will be happy. Whenever you give in to tabi'ah, something happens that brings in unhappiness. So they will always associate this. This will be inscribed in their psyche, that when I follow fitrah, I am happy.
Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil Jaffer na ang ikatlong yugto ng pagpapalaki ng anak ay nagsisimula kapag ang bata ay umabot na sa sapat na pagkamahinog, karaniwan sa edad na 14 o 15 taon. Sa puntong ito, hindi na maaaring umasa ang mga magulang sa kanilang otoridad o sa walang pagtatanong na pagsunod ng anak. Ang bata ngayon ay isang vizier, isang tagapayo na dapat gabayan sa pamamagitan ng konsultasyon, pag-uusap, at mga mapagnilay na tanong sa halip na mga utos. Sa halip na sabihing, gawin mo ito dahil sinabi ko, dapat magtanim ang mga magulang ng mga ideyang maghihikayat sa anak na mag-isip at gumawa ng mga pasya batay sa fitrah. Ang matalinong paggabay ay tumutulong sa mga anak na maisapuso ang mga pagpapahalaga at madala ang mga ito kahit matagal na silang nakahiwalay sa tahanan. Sa pamamagitan ng pagtatanong ng mga tamang tanong at paghikayat sa malalim na pagninilay, ang mga magulang ay nagtatanim ng mga binhi ng fitrah sa puso at isipan ng kanilang mga anak. Binigyang diin ni Brother Khalil na sa yugtong ito kailangang unti-unting bitawan ng mga magulang ang kanilang kontrol. Tulad ng saranggol ang kailangang bigyan ng mas mahabang tali habang ito ay lalong tumataas. Ang mga anak ay nangangailangan ng mas malaking kalayaan at mas mabigat na pananagutan habang sila ay nagiging ganap na adulto. Patuloy silang dapat payuhan at suportahan ng kanilang mga magulang, ngunit kailangang iwasan ang labis na pagdidikta o pagsakal sa kanilang paglago. Sa kalaunan, dapat pagkatiwalaan ng mga magulang ang fitrah na kanilang inalagaan at hayaang maging malaya ang kanilang mga anak. Magtatag ng sarili nilang pamilya, gumawa ng sariling mga pasya, at maabot ang buong potensyal na itinakda ng Allah para sa kanila. Ang tunay na tagumpay ng pagiging magulang ay hindi ang habang buhay na pagkontrol sa mga anak, kundi ang paghahanda sa kanila upang magabayan ang kanilang sarili sa pamamagitan ng fitrah na inilagay ng Allah sa kanilang mga puso.
This points now in the third phase, which in our breakdown of age would be from the ages 14 or 15, 16 onwards. You cannot expect unquestioning obedience from that child. Instead, you can guide them by asking the right questions. And this is where we as men always fail, because we see ourselves as the head of the family, so we need to be obeyed. Therefore, we attempt to force the child, you do it because I said so. Never mind how I raised you, but because I said so. Women, on the other hand, learn that this is not the way to get what you want. They know that when you want to get something, you don't use force. There is a way to get it. For example, many a times our wives know that we like to feel good that I am the head of the family and I make decisions. Right? Some of us may even have a sign at home that says, I am the boss of this house and I have my wife's permission to say so. Okay? But women know this, that you as a man want to feel good about being the head of the family. That is why your wife, if she is clever, she will never tell you, do this, do that, I want this, I want that. She will put it as a question. Do you think this is a good idea? She plants the idea in you, it becomes your idea. You adopt it. Now when you say, let's do this, you think it's your idea. You feel good, you feel empowered, you feel you have made the decision. She still gets what she wants, but this is wisdom. Your child has to be taught the same way. Instead of forcing your child and saying, don't do this, don't do that, suggest, ask a question, plant an idea. The most resilient virus is an idea. If you plant an idea in someone's mind, even if they disagree, they will never be able to remove that idea from their mind. It will stay there. So if you keep planting the right ideas in your child's mind, then even after they leave home, their fitrah will guide them, because you have planted the seeds of fitrah and not the seeds of tabi'a. Once your child reaches this third phase, well, before that, what we want to say is that this third stage of being a vizier is the same as that first stage of being a king or a prince. The difference, though, is that when they were a prince, they used to order and command. Now, they will not order you and command you, but they will simply advise you. They are your second in command. Once your child has crossed this third phase, ثُمَّ خَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُ, now let them go, now let them be independent, now give them room, do not smother them, give them some space, let them have the independence to feel confident and start their own family. This is very tricky. We need to know when the caterpillar has developed its wings and it is time to let it leave the chrysalis. It is time to let it leave the nest, as opposed to continue trying to dominate it. And as I said, it doesn't have to be 21 years. It will depend on the generation. It will depend on the place and the country you live. It will depend on the era you live, what kind of maturity you have. We all know that our grandmothers got married when they were 15 and 16 years old. By the time they were 18, they had children, they were running a family. Our grandfathers, when they were 18, they were already married, had children, they were running businesses, looking after a family. Today's 18-year-old only knows how to play on the Xbox. He does not have maturity. He does not have a sense of responsibility. You have to constantly tell him, take out the garbage, do this, do that. Partly it is our fault, how we raise them. We treat them like kids until we realize he's already an adult. Partly it is also the system we live in, because by the grace of Allah, we have an education system where children continue to study until much into even past teenage, which is not a bad thing, but because of that, we treat them again as being dependents, children, irresponsible, until they've at least finished their initial university education, and then we start seeing that now they're able to hold a job, they're independent, they're more mature. Okay? But the timing is tricky. It is something that we need to think about. To put it again as an example with an analogy, raising a child is like flying a kite. Initially, when you want to fly a kite, you tie a string to the kite, you have to run with the kite, because the kite is on the ground, it doesn't take off, it doesn't rise, it doesn't fly, it doesn't have anything to show. You run with it. As you run with it, it begins to take flight. Once it takes flight, you don't have to keep running with it, but there is a string attached to you. You continue holding onto that string. That kite is still attached to you. Now, for those of you who may have flown kites, I don't know if you, I'm sure those of you who are immigrants, you've all flown a kite. Okay? As you're flying the kite, especially if you're from India or Afghanistan, I'm sure you've flown a kite. So as the kite is flying, the string is attached. Now, there is an art to flying the kite. Sometimes you have to pull the string, and then sometimes you have to let go of it. You can't keep pulling and you can't keep letting go. You pull, you let go. You pull, you let go. But as it goes higher, you have to keep releasing the string and allowing it more room and allowing it more freedom. There comes a point where the string runs out. At that point, you have only two choices. You either keep holding onto the string, in which case the kite will come crashing down, or you let the kite go and allow it to soar as high as it can fly. Raising a child is like that. Once it takes off, you don't have to keep running with it. Now you have given your fitrah into its tabi'a. Now let its fitrah guide it, but you hold on to it, you consult, you advise, you pull sometimes, you let go sometimes, you pull. When you see he has fully developed, now at that point let go of the string so that he rises to his full potential.
Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil na ang panahon ng pagdadalaga at pagbibinata ay ang yugto kung kailan nagsisimulang lumitaw ng buong lakas ang tabi'a. Ang mga pisikal na pagnanasa, mga ambisyon at mga interes sa makamundong bagay ay nagiging higit na malakas. Dahil dito, napakahalagang ang fitrah ay matatag na at aktibong gumagabay sa tao bago pa man dumating ang panahong ito. Kung walang fitrah, ang tabi'a ay magiging tulad ng isang malakas na kabayong tumatakbo ng walang mga ngabayo, puno ng lakas at sigla ngunit walang direksyon at layunin. Hindi sinisira ng fitrah ang tabi'a. Sa halip, binibigyan nito ito ng mas mataas na layunin. Ang propesyon, pag-aasawa, paglalakbay, kayamanan at iba pang makamundong gawain ay hindi masama sa kanilang sarili. Ang mahalaga ay ang dahilan kung bakit ginagawa ang mga ito. Ang tabi'a ay naghahanap ng personal na kasiyahan, kaginhawahan at pakinabang, samantalang ang fitrah ay naghahangad na maglingkod sa Allah, makatulong sa sangkatauhan at lumago sa espiritual na aspeto. Maaaring piliin ng isang tao ang anumang propesyon, ngunit kapag ito ay ginagabayan ng fitrah, ang kanyang trabaho ay nagiging daan upang maisakatuparan ang isang mas dakilang layunin. Ang doktor ay hindi lamang nagpapagaling para sa kita. Ginagawa niya ito upang maglingkod sa mga nilikha ng Allah. Ang guro ay hindi lamang nagtuturo para sa sahod. Ginagawa niya ito upang magbigay liwanag sa isipan at puso ng iba. Sa pamamagitan ng mga paghahambing sa mga ngabayo at kabayo, sa saranggola at tali nito at sa pana at palaso, itinuro ni Brother Khalil na hindi tungkulin ng mga magulang na tukuyin ang bawat detalye ng kinabukasan ng kanilang anak. Ang kanilang pananagutan ay manatiling nakasentro sa fitrah at magtanim ng mga ideyang nakabatay rito sa isipan ng kanilang mga anak. Sa halip na itoon lamang ang mga tanong sa pera, katayuan at tagumpay sa mundo, dapat itanong ng mga magulang kung paano makatutulong ang isang propesyon sa sangkatauhan, sa Islam at sa paghahanda para sa kabilang buhay. Sa ganitong paraan, natutulungan nilang magkaroon ang kanilang mga anak ng pananaw sa buhay na may malinaw na layunin at mas mataas na adhikain. Sa pagtatapos ng bahaging ito, binigyang diin ni Brother Khalil na ang pinakadakilang regalo na maibibigay ng mga magulang sa kanilang mga anak ay hindi kayamanan, katanyagan o tagumpay sa mundo, kundi isang buhay at aktibong fitrah, isang kamalayang kaloob ng Allah na gumagabay sa tao tungo sa katotohanan, nagbibigay ng tapang upang manindigan sa tama at tumutulong upang makita ang higit na mahalaga kaysa sa mga pansamantalang alindog ng mundong ito. Kapag ang fitrah ay gising at buhay, nagagabayan nito ang tabi'a tungo sa mga makabuluhang layunin. Dahil dito, ang kaluluwa ay patuloy na lumalago, umuunlad at lumalapit sa Allah sa bawat yugto ng buhay.
You may have heard of this poet, Khalil Gibran. He gives this beautiful analogy where God is the archer. You, the parent, are the bow in the hand of the archer. And the arrow that flies through the bow is your child. So the archer uses you, the bow, to release arrows into the future. Now, look at the words he says. He says, you are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. Just as God loves your child that flies, He loves you if you are stable, if you are fitrah-oriented. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever tried archery. Try it sometimes. When you hold a bow in your hand and you string it with the arrow, when you pull the arrow back, if you try to release the arrow by pulling the arrow and then letting go of it, it will not go. It will in fact hurt you. It might even leave a welt on your hand. The art to it is that you hold the bow, you pull the string, and then you very slowly release your fingers. You don't pull, you just release your fingers. And when the time is right, when you have left the arrow just right, it slowly slips out of your hand and flies. And the more smoothly you can do this, the better the flight of that arrow to its target. In other words, it is not for you to determine where your child will go. It is for Allah. If you submit to Allah as a parent the way a bow submits in the hands of the archer, the arrow will find Allah. It will find its mark. Its fitrah will guide it. But it is when the bow has its own will that is against the will of the archer, and the bow wants to do something other than what the archer wants to do, that is where the arrow suffers. Your child suffers and does not find Allah and becomes tabi'a oriented because you are standing between the arrow and the archer. The age of 14 is also interesting because at that point for boys, that is around the time when they attain puberty as well. That is the time of their bulugh. That is the time when they attain physical maturity as well. So up until this point, their tabi'a was largely driven by some limited pleasures like food, for example, or playing games and so on. But now they're becoming an adult. All the possible tabi'a needs are emerging in them. So the mount now will show its full force. That is why it is important that by the time they get to that age, you have planted the right seeds of fitrah that will now guide it. While tabi'a will gallop for survival and for the fulfillment of its physical needs, fitrah discovers the world and finds its purpose. Think about this for a moment. If you have a horse and you have reined it and you have tamed it and trained it properly, while the horse gallops with full speed only because it is a physical need, because that's what it does not know where you're going or why you're going. It is only doing what it is meant to do. You, the rider that sits on it, you are the one who sees the world. You are the one who discovers the place. You are the one who enjoys the scenery. You are the one who knows the destination you're going to. The horse does not know. It is simply your mount. In the same way, if your fitrah is in place, your tabi'a will find its career. Your tabi'a will fulfill its physical needs. Your tabi'a will eat and marry. Your tabi'a will procreate. Your tabi'a will find new careers. Your tabi'a will travel and see the world. But what will really gain experience, what will really evolve is your fitrah. It is your fitrah, your soul that will evolve because your fitrah is the one that is the rider. That is the one that will take all those experiences of career, of work, of traveling, of migrating, of marriage, of children and learn from that and evolve spiritually. That is why it is so important that when tabi'a erupts with full force, once your child has matured physically, fitrah has to be in place. The horse must not run wild. It will not go anywhere meaningful. It will just wander around aimlessly unless there is a rider and there is a rein and it takes it to a purposeful direction. Fitrah will not be satisfied with simply this world. It will seek something loftier. And when it does that, it will take tabi'a with it. It will soar with it. It will lift the whole body, just like we said, a butterfly lifts the worm with it and takes it. The wings of a bird takes the body of the bird with it. And because it has fitrah, it will see that this world is just a glass bead. It is not the real gem. So it will seek something loftier than what its tabi'ah seeks. If the fitrah is asleep, then I become a rider who only wants what the horse wants. But if my fitrah is awake, then now there is something human. The mount is simply a means. The rider is awake. The rider seeks something loftier than just physical needs. Physical needs are then not done or met simply because it is an animal instinct within me, but they are done with purpose. They are done with meaning. The constant preoccupation of the rider is the evolution of the soul, the metamorphosis, the race against time for the wings to emerge, not just to fulfill a need because it is a need. So if it is my career, tabi'a wants to be a doctor because there is lots of money in it. Fitrah wants to also be a doctor but to save lives. There is a more noble profession than being a doctor, and that is being a teacher. Because the prophets and the anbiya were teachers. There is no profession on this earth that is more noble than that of a teacher from an Islamic perspective. So when tabi'a wants to be a teacher, it says, be a teacher. You get summer holidays and you get to travel. When fitrah wants to be a teacher, it says, be a teacher so you can make a difference in people's lives, so that you can not just cure people's health and physical and body, but you can cure their souls. You see, something as simple as this. We said tabi'a and fitrah can complement each other. You can be a plumber, be a doctor, be a pilot, be a journalist, do whatever you want. But find a fitrah motive for it. Don't find a tabi'a motive for it. We said in the third stage, when you give the child free rein to express their own fitrah and allow their fitrah to determine how they will use their tabi'ah, we said this is like an internship or a residency. But during an internship or a residency, that intern also needs a doctor besides him who constantly guides him. That is why you need a parent who is fitrah oriented. So we said that after they cross this age of 14 or 15, now they are this vizier that you consult, that you advise. So based on this, I'm coming towards a conclusion. I just want to briefly mention here the issue of knowledge. How we deny our child fitrah sometimes. We know by now that denying our child fitrah is wrong, and that giving them this opportunity for their fitrah to emerge is the greatest wealth you can ever give them, even more important than giving them education. So I want you to think about how you guide your children in matters of career when they're thinking about taking a career. Think about the questions you ask them. Remember what I said, the most resilient virus is an idea. The kind of questions you ask is planting those ideas. Before you ask your child, this career you want to do, how much money will you make? How much will it cost to do this? What kind of a work will you do when you do this? Will you have to leave home or stay with us? Before you ask these questions, ask them, how does this affect your hereafter? How will you help humanity with this career? How will you help Islam with this career? Once you have put these ideas in your mind, now let your child choose the career he wants. Whether he chooses to be a plumber or a doctor or a journalist or a pilot or whatever he chooses to be, he will nurture that idea himself. His fitrah will nurture it. And somehow he will find a way to use any career in any profession to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to find Him through serving Allah's creation and humanity. So this is again very important. Teach your children that their greatest asset is their fitrah. This inner God-given consciousness that speaks to them whenever they do something wrong. This must never be allowed to die. And as long as this is alive, it will give them courage.
Ipinaliwanag ni Brother Khalil Jaffer na ang layunin ng pagiging magulang ay hindi lamang ang makapagpalaki ng masunuring mga anak, kundi ng mga anak na ginagabayan ng fitrah, ang likas na kamalayang ipinagkaloob ng Allah na humihila sa tao tungo sa katotohanan, kabutihan, at espiritual na paglago. Batay sa kilalang hadith, ang pagpapalaki ng anak ay dumaraan sa tatlong yugto, 7 taon bilang isang prinsipe, 7 taon bilang isang tagapaglingkod, at 7 taon bilang isang vizier o tagapayo. Sa unang yugto, dapat pahintulutan ng mga magulang na umunlad ang tabi'a ng bata, ang kanyang likas na damdamin, pagnanasa at personalidad sa isang kapaligirang puno ng pagmamahal, seguridad at pagtitiwala. Hindi ito nangangahulugan ng pagpapalayaw kundi ng pagbibigay daan upang mabuo ang kanyang pagkatao bago ito hubugin ng fitrah. Ang pagpapalaki sa pamamagitan ng takot, kahihiyan at labis na pagkontrol ay maaaring makasira sa likas na kadalisayan ng bata at magdulot ng emosyonal at espiritual na kahinaan. Sa ikalawang yugto, ang magulang ay pansamantalang nagsisilbing gabay ng fitrah ng anak. Dito unti-unting tinuturo na ang mga lakas na pagnanasa ay dapat gabayan ng mas mataas na layunin. Hindi winawasak ang tabi'a, kundi itinutuwid at pinapadalisay upang matutunan ng bata na ang tunay na kaligayahan ay nagmumula sa pagsunod sa Allah. Sa pamamagitan ng pagmamahal, paghikayat, mabuting halimbawa at wastong disiplina, natututuhan ng bata na unahin ang banal na patnubay kaysa sa pansariling kagustuhan.
Now, not all of us may be fitrah-oriented. Some of us may be still trying to go that way. Some of us may never hear about this. This is why we need teachers. This is why you need to take your child to the madrasa. This is why we need alims. But we need to teach our children to be comfortable around alims. We teach our children to admire and look up to movie stars, but we don't do that with scholars and alims. They are afraid of them, they're intimidated. And I do understand that sometimes the fault is from the alim side, because there may be alims who want to keep that distance because they see that as a way in which they keep their respect and honor. So there may be somebody out there, I don't know, who might say, kiss my hand and then go away. But many of the ulama are not like that. So we must not train our children in such a way that they're even afraid to look at the alim, because he might look at me and say, why were you looking at me? We must teach them so that they are very comfortable with them, that if we are not fitrah-oriented, they become their mentors, they become their role models. But we must provide every avenue, every opportunity to our children to get that opportunity to be fitrah-oriented. Whether it is sending them to an Islamic school, whether it is making provisions for such schools to exist, whether it is sending them to the madrasa, or whether it is bringing them to the mosque where they are constantly in touch with that which is sacred and fitrah-oriented. So we must ensure that we don't allow our children to hide their true nature and their true feelings. We create an atmosphere where they can express this freely. And then we plant the seeds of fitrah, or put it differently, do not stop those buds from blooming. Allow the sapling to come out before you put the sticks to guide it. When a plant is growing, sometimes we put some sticks besides it to guide the growth and the direction of that plant. But you do not put it while it is still a seed, because you don't know how and where it is going to come out from. So you do not impose fitrah and rules and restrictions. That is why the first 7 years they are princes. You allow that sapling to come out. Once it starts showing growth, and then when you see it is not growing in the right direction, then you put in those sticks to guide it, to give it some direction. Or to give you another analogy that we will all understand, even our children will understand. We put braces on our children's teeth, but we do it after the teeth come out. We don't start putting things before the teeth come out. Nothing will come out if you do that. You allow the teeth to come out, and then when they start showing they're misaligned, that's when you bring in those braces. Those braces are painful, they're difficult, so they tell me. Okay? But you do that, you let them go through that pain and that discipline of fitrah after you start seeing some misalignment. So timing is critical. If you put it too soon, you will not get anything. If you put it too late, it is even harder and even more painful. That is why raising the child can be tricky if you're not constantly keeping your eye on when is the right time to introduce fitrah in this child. It is important not to let, as I said, the buds drop off before they even start blooming. Particularly at home. Okay, what we do is, when the child is at home, when they are under 7 years of age, we constantly tell them, don't run, don't shout, don't talk, don't do this, don't do that. We try and suppress their need to express tabi'a. When we bring them out to public, we don't do anything. We let them run wild. And then after they're 7 years old, when we need to train them, we do the opposite. At home, we don't tell them anything. And in public, we scold them and embarrass them in front of others. This is because we do not understand that process. It actually has to be the other way around. So allow your child to show his feelings. Let him express his tabi'a. Let him show his attachment, even if it is attachment to the world, and then guide him. When a child is growing, particularly after the first phase, they want fitrah. They want their tabi'a to be guided by fitrah. They want discipline. They want structure. They want someone to guide them, not with scolding, but with love. Now, in time, the issue of security is going to come up. When a child is young, they adore you. You are everything. You are like God to them. Okay? They believe that you, the parent, are the most famous person in the world. You are the strongest. You are the bravest. You are the best. There is no one better than you. But as they grow up, they begin to realize that you are human like them. The older they get, the more they realize that my parents are not as intelligent or as strong or as famous or as secure. They also feel pain the way I do. And this can be a very humbling and vulnerable moment for a child. Even after they grow up, the first time, remember the first time you left home, when you went overseas for studies, or you left home, or you simply were away from family for a while. It was a moment you felt vulnerable. Suddenly you felt you are on your own. No one really cares about you, isn't it? There is no security except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, as parents, we provide that security, and if we do again the right job with fitrah, when the time is right, if we have taken the time to raise children who are rooted in religion, who are rooted in fitrah, then when the time is right and we are old and we are senile and we cannot be that illusory sense of security for them, we cannot, because when they're very young, they have that pacifier, they have that blanket, they have that milk bottle that is their sense of security. There is you that is sense of security. As they wean out of this, my home, my family, my parents, they will look for another source of security. If we train them right, and we make them fitrah rooted, fitrah based, fitrah driven, then they will automatically now look for something stronger, something that does not grow old, something that does not grow frail, and that will be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we have never sent our child to the madrasa, if we have never made religion an important part of our life, what will replace that sense of security? That is where they will seek addictions, that is where they will seek other things that will never satisfy them and run from pillar to post.
Sa ikatlong yugto, kapag ang anak ay nagiging ganap na kabataan, hindi na sapat ang simpleng pag-uutos. Dapat siyang gabayan sa pamamagitan ng konsultasyon, pagninilay at matalinong pagtatanong upang matutong magpasya batay sa kanyang sariling fitrah. Unti-unting binibigyan siya ng kalayaan at pananagutan habang patuloy na sinusuportahan ng mga magulang. Ang tunay na tagumpay ng pagiging magulang ay makitang ang anak ay kaya ng gabayan ang sarili sa pamamagitan ng fitrah na kanyang itinanim at inalagaan. Binigyang diin din ni Brother Khalil ang kahalagahan ng mga eskolar, mga paaralang Islamiko, mga madrasa, mga masjid at mabubuting huwaran sa pagpapatibay ng fitrah. Kasabay nito, kailangang maramdaman ng mga bata na ligtas silang ipahayag ang kanilang tunay na damdamin at pagkatao. Habang lumalaki sila at nauunawaan na ang kanilang mga magulang ay tao lamang, dapat silang matutong ilipat ang kanilang pakiramdam ng seguridad mula sa mga tao tungo sa Allah, ang tanging hindi nagbabago at hindi nawawala. Sa kabuuan, itinuro ni Brother Khalil na ang fitrah ay likas na matapang, samantalang ang tabi'a ay nakatuon sa pag-iwas sa sakit at paghahanap ng kaligtasan. Kapag pinalaki ang mga bata na laging iniisip ang opinyon ng iba, nagiging mahina ang kanilang fitrah at umaasa sila sa pagsang-ayon ng tao. Ngunit kapag natutunan nilang kumuha ng lakas, dangal at kumpiyansa mula sa Allah, nagiging matatag sila sa kanilang pananampalataya at mga prinsipyo. Ang pinakamahalagang pamana na maibibigay ng mga magulang ay hindi kayamanan o katayuan, kundi isang buhay at gising na fitrah na patuloy na gagabay sa kanilang mga anak patungo sa Allah sa buong buhay nila.
Again, I'm coming to a conclusion, but you will remember in the early lectures we said that fitrah is courageous. Fitrah is not afraid of death. Tabi'a, it fights for survival. Tabi'a is a coward. Tabi'a flees from pain. So tabi'a lacks courage. So as I said, when your child is growing up in the initial years, the reason why you don't instill in them fear of people is because you want them to be courageous, you want them to be self-confident. Now look at how this shows itself when you raise a child who is more connected to the unlimited source, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and takes energy from there, versus raising a child who takes his energy and strength from society and from people. And I gave this example this morning actually when I was talking to some children at the school here, that sometimes we raise a child who might wear hijab, but when she goes out, she is ashamed. She is thinking, everyone else around me is not wearing. What will people think? This is fear of what people think. The problem is in the earlier ages when she was still very young, the fear of people was stronger in her than the fear of Allah. Or take another example that I give. In summer, we all go for picnics. Then we go to a park. When it is time for salat, we ourselves are ashamed to pray salat in public because people will look at us and laugh at us. So we wait and go home and pray late and hide in our room so that people may not see us. When we do that, how do we expect our children to have courage? We must be fitrah oriented. When I worry more about what Allah says, when I am not ashamed of what I practice because I get satisfaction and peace and I'm connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then my child sees that and learns from that and also becomes courageous. So this is very important. We do not have to be worried constantly about what people think. You go to the park sometimes, you see people in the park doing tai chi and doing yoga, and do you laugh at them? You might look at them curiously and move on. So the ego gives you this impression, everyone's looking at me, everyone's, in reality, those people after 5 minutes are not even looking at you or thinking about you. But because we have been raised fearful, that is why our fitrah is weak. We never have the courage to say the right thing, to do the right thing, to stand up for the right values, to stand up for our faith, to stand up for what we believe in. Because there is that tabi'a, that fear, that fleeing from pain, that mode of survival. And if we don't do this, if we don't fix this and raise our children to be fearless, then it will also come back and bite us. As they grow older, they will be embarrassed of us. At one point, we were their heroes. At one point, they looked up to us. Now, when their friends are around, they'll tell us, Mom, Dad, please go away. You're going to embarrass me. I don't want you near me. They're ashamed of you because of how we have raised them. They are more concerned about what my friends think, not about what Allah thinks. But if you have raised them correctly, if they are fitrah-oriented, they will proudly introduce you to their friends and say, this is my father. Because they know if this is a true friend, they will be as proud to know my father as they are to know me. It doesn't matter what my father is like, whether my father is handicapped, whether my father is even intellectually disabled, I will still proudly introduce him because I know that he is my father and that I come from him and that I am rooted from Allah. My sense of pride, my sense of courage, my sense of esteem comes from Allah, not from people. And then this goes further then. When I have a job as well, I'm constantly worried. What will my boss say? What will people at work think if I tell them I'm going to pray? What will my boss say if I say I can't go for lunch because you're going to have alcohol at the table, for example, right? And then when I retire, when I'm 60, 70 years old and I'm sitting alone at home and I'm thinking, did it really matter when I was 20, 30 years old? I was so afraid of my boss. Where is that boss now? He is dead, or he himself is now an old man. How much I gave up of my religion for the sake of other ordinary human beings like me who at the end of the day have no value, okay? Who are inconsequential. What is left now is only me and Allah. I now have to answer to Allah for all those moments when I did not have the courage to stand up for the truth. Why? Because I was driven by tabi'a and I was not driven by fitrah. So where we draw energy from, where we draw power from, where we draw courage from is important. We must teach our children to draw it from fitrah and not from tabi'ah. And that is why Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 54, وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. That those who are truly faithful, they do not fear the blame of anyone who blames them. Meaning, if they know that what they are doing is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they are not concerned with others, what others think. First and foremost, what does Allah think? And this is the principle of fitrah. Every other fear for other than Allah is rooted in the fear of death in reality, whether it is death of the ego or death of the physical body. And fitrah transcends the fear of death.
Maraming salamat sa panunood. Kung nakita mong kapaki-pakinabang ang content na ito, huwag kalimutang i-like, i-follow at i-share. Sama-sama nating buuin ang isang komunidad kung saan lumalago ang mga ideya at naipapalaganap ang inspirasyon. Malaki ang nagagawa ng iyong suporta. Tuloy-tuloy lang tayo, isang click sa bawat hakbang.